Hey, what's up, Called? It's Landon. I am one of many leaders here at Called Ministry, and I am so glad to be back with you. If you're with us last week, we weren't here in this setting. We were actually at a park. We had our park night last week, Friday, and it was a blast. We had about 40 students come out, and we were just having fun. We were fellowshipping, we're building relationships, and it was great. If you were at Park Day and you had a blast, someone say, "Oh yeah." Now we're excited if you were with us at Park Day, but if you weren't, don't worry. We're going to do more things like that. In fact, coming up, we are going to have a movie night, and so that's going to be fun. You don't want to miss that. And we're going to have more Called Hangouts in the future, and so we hope that you can join us there. But we are also so glad that you're here tonight. You're here on purpose, for a purpose. We believe that God brought you here. And we believe that He brought you here just in time to dive into this brand new message series. We are in a brand new series called The Chain Effect. Someone say, ooh, the chain effect. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, what is the chain effect? So, in fact, turn to someone and say, what's the chain effect? Right? What's the chain effect? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that is the whole purpose of tonight. This first message is really just laying the foundation of what this series is going to bring, what we're praying this series will bring to your life, and what really is the chain effect. And so in order for us to dive into what it is, what's the chain effect, this first message of the series, I do want to also let you know that this is the first time this year, in fact, this might be the first time ever in Called history, that we are doing a series based on one whole chapter of the Bible. Someone say, what? Yeah, we're doing a series based on one whole chapter of the Bible. That means that every single message in this series is going to come out of the book of Philippians. Now, the book of Philippians is a book of the Bible. I have my Bible here. And if you look at these pages right here, these couple of pages, three, 4 pages, here's my whole Bible. And this is the book of Philippians. Now, the book of Philippians in these couple of pages is broken down to 4 chapters. So when I say that we're doing this series based on the book of Philippians, it means that every single week we're going to be talking about these couple of chapters. And in fact, every week we're going to break down one chapter. We're not going to go verse by verse, but we are going to go chapter by chapter. So tonight we're going to be talking about something from chapter 1. Next week's going to be something from chapter 2. Week 3 is going to be something from chapter 3. And week 4 is going to be something from chapter 4. And so we're going to go chapter by chapter. And so we're super excited. But to lay the right foundation for this series, you need to know, what is the book of Philippians? Who wrote the book of Philippians? Well, I'm going to let you know that right now. In fact, the name that you're going to hear a lot in this series is about this guy named Paul. Someone say Paul. Yeah, so this guy named Paul, he was known throughout a lot of different churches. In fact, Paul would go church to church, preaching the gospel, talking about God. He would talk about Jesus, and he would talk about the message of Jesus. Now, the thing was, the message of Jesus was actually highly controversial in that time. In fact, today it's pretty risky to talk about the message of Jesus, because a lot of people maybe won't receive it well. And so because Paul went around to all these churches and he was known for talking about the message of Jesus, and people thought that that message was controversial, Paul actually got into a lot of trouble. Someone say, oh no! Yeah, Paul got into a lot of trouble. And in fact, on one instance, he was preaching at a church in Jerusalem. And he may have offended some people. Maybe some people knew what he was saying was true, but they just didn't like hearing it. The religious leaders in Jerusalem and some of the politicians and some of the people there actually came and arrested Paul. Paul got arrested. He didn't just get in trouble. He was put in chains. He got arrested. He was taken away, and he was put in a prison in Rome. And see, one of the churches that he was speaking to and had relationships with was this church named the Church of Philippi. So when the Church of Philippi found out that Paul got captured, he was taken to prison, they were scared. They were scared that the message of Jesus wasn't going to be shared or spread anymore because Paul was captured. And so Paul, from prison, wrote the Church of Philippi a letter. He wrote them a letter and he assured them that everything was going to be okay. That although he was chained up and although he wasn't free, that the gospel of Jesus was going to spread free. And so he wrote this letter to this church of Philippi. And that letter is what we read here in the book of Philippians. So Paul's letter to the church of Philippi turned into the book of Philippians in our Bibles today. And so we're reading about this guy. We're reading Paul's words. So we're reading the guy in prison, his words, Paul in prison, his words to encourage the Philippians. And so tonight we're jumping into chapter 1 of Philippians. To give you a background, the theme of Philippians chapter 1 is a lot of suffering. Paul is in prison. He's chained up. He's well experienced in what pain and suffering looks like. But although chapter 1 is about pain and suffering, ironically, chapter 1 is also about great joy. Because Paul knew that in his suffering, he could find joy. He knew that because he suffered for God, that there was joy in the midst. He realized that pain and joy could coexist. They could exist at the same time. And he realized that there was purpose in his suffering, there was purpose in his problems, and there was purpose in his pain. So chapter 1 is all about his suffering, but it's more about his joy. In fact, we're going to read this in chapter 1, verse 12. It says, "Now I want you to know." He's talking about the church of Philippi. This is his letter. He's saying, "I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of my brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more people to proclaim the gospel without fear." Paul, in his stressful, painful, suffering chains, was encouraging the church, saying it's going to be okay, that there's purpose for my pain. See, the whole purpose of this chain effect is to learn some things from Paul. And this is the main idea for week 1. The main idea for week 1 is that Jesus can change your chains. Jesus can change your chains. Now, I want someone to say that. Say, "Change your chains." It's a kind of a tongue twister. Say it 10 times fast. Change your chains. Change your change. It's hard. My mouth is already locking up. I can't say that. But it's true. Jesus can change your chains. He did this with Paul. See, these chains were meant to lock up the gospel. It was meant to prevent Paul from talking to an audience about God. But what Jesus changed that to was a captive audience. See, Paul couldn't go out and talk about God, but all of the palace guards, the people guarding him, the people in that prison, was all a captive audience for Paul to talk about God. So Paul talks about God to the guards. He talked about God to the people who was locking him up. He talked about God to everyone in the palace, that eventually everyone knew the gospel. Everyone knew it. See, his chains were really meant to make Paul scared, fearful, make him less confident. But Jesus changed that to the opposite. His chains didn't make him fearful. He was more bold. He was more confident. He knew that God was still good. He knew that God was still in control. See, and the last thing, those chains were actually meant to almost disprove God. The chains were meant to show people that, his God was weak. But in reality, Jesus changed that. And it really showed people how confident Paul was in his faith. Paul didn't waver. He didn't give up. He continued to preach and talk. And everyone knew that he was in chains for Christ. And because of that, because of his faith, they were actually believing more in this God. They were thinking, well, if this guy can act like this while he's in prison, then maybe this God is actually real. Jesus can change your chains. Now, I want to be very clear about what we're talking about for this chain effect series. What we're saying is that when the world feels against you, when you feel like the world is against you, when you feel like that everyone wants you in chains, when you feel like everyone's against you, they don't agree, that you're holding on to your faith and you're just trying to push through, when you feel like it's because of your faith that you get in trouble, that you have some consequences, that there is purpose in that pain, there's purpose in that struggle, and that through those chains, God is going to use it and change it so that the gospel is preached even louder, even clearer, that this chain effect will start happening, that you will inspire someone because of your struggles and because of your faith, that they will inspire someone, and it just kind of dominoes, and it's a chain reaction. It's a chain effect. And I also want to be clear about the chains that we're talking about. See, some of us, we struggle. We struggle with some things that we don't want to talk about. Maybe you struggle with pornography. Maybe you struggle with some thoughts. Maybe you struggle with suicidal thoughts. Maybe you struggle with a relationship in your life. Maybe you struggle with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, maybe an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend. Maybe you struggle with obedience to your parents, or maybe you struggle with attitude or gossip. Maybe you have these struggles that maybe you feel like is chaining you up. We believe that God can use that also. And we believe here at Called that you can be open and you can talk to your leaders about those struggles, about those chains. But the chains that we're talking about in this series is a little different. Although God can still use those chains, what we're talking about is we're talking about the situations that you feel chained up because of your faith. You don't feel chained up because you're doing something wrong. You feel chained up because you're doing something right, because you're doing something good. I remember this one time I was in an airplane. We're coming home from a conference from California. So we're flying from California back to Hawaii. And I was seated by myself, away from my team, right next to two other people. And so it was me, it was this guy, and his son. And to be quite honest with you, the guy that I was sitting next to was probably one of the rudest passengers ever. He was complaining about everything. He was complaining that it was too cold, then it was too hot, then the light wasn't turning on, then his speakers weren't working, then his screen was flickering, and he was just complaining and complaining. He would call the flight attendant, complain, call the flight attendant, complain, and just complaining. So I was sitting next to him, and I just felt, in my spirit, God say, be a light to that person. Show them love. Make his plane ride more enjoyable because he's having a bad flight. And so I sat next to him and I started to have a conversation with him. I started to relate to him. I found what we had in common. Why he was going to Hawaii. He was asking things to do. We were having a good conversation. In fact, he, through our whole conversation, didn't call the flight attendant once. We're having a good time. He was smiling. He was saying, man, I'm glad that you're sitting next to me. He was saying all these good things. And then he asked me this question. He said, hey, well, since you live in Hawaii, what do you do in Hawaii? And I said, well, I'm a youth pastor. I lead youth in a church. And his face just changed. He said, oh, you're one of those religious people. And he said, actually, you're the problem. And he started to turn on me. He said, you're the problem. You're the issue. all the problems of this world is because of your God, is because of your faith. He said, you probably hate me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't hate you. He said, no, you probably hate me. You hate me because I'm gay and I don't believe in God. And so to you, I'm the devil and you hate me. I said, look, I don't hate you. I never said I hate you. I mean, in fact, I would even say the opposite. I would say that I care for you. He said, no, you can't say that. You can't say that. And he just couldn't believe that I could still love him, although we were so different. I said, look, I'm sorry for maybe what you've been through, but I care for you. And I think Jesus still loves you, and I love you. And he was mad. In fact, as I said that, his finger was pressing the button. Like to call the flight attendant. The speakers on the airplane is going crazy. And the flight attendant like walks over like, what's wrong? And he said, I don't want to sit next to this person. And in fact, a couple times to try to solve his problem, the big issue was that his monitor wasn't working. His speakers weren't working. And so the flight attendant was trying to get him to move to the back of the plane, but he didn't want to do that because he thought it was a downgrade. He thought that, no, I don't want to go in the back is less, it's a downgrade. And so he was calling this flight attendant, so I said, hey, look, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we couldn't sit together, but I told the flight attendant, I'll move. You don't need to make him move, I'll move. In fact, I'll move to the back. So I got up, I moved to the back. And in that moment, I experienced some change. Because in that moment, I felt like I did nothing wrong. I was just sharing my faith, and this guy came at me, and he was so mad, and I felt that I was defeated, that maybe he's never gonna know God. So I went and I sat in the back of the plane, and all of a sudden, 3 flight attendants come, and they say, hey, we want to let you know that we are so sorry that you had to sit next to him. I said, no, there's no problem. They said, no, we saw that you actually were connecting with him and that he was fine. And all of a sudden, he didn't want to sit next to you. I said, yeah, it's because he found I'm a youth pastor and he didn't like that. And they're like, no, thank you for saving us because you made his ride okay. Look, we haven't heard from him since. So they said, come with us. And so they took me from the back of the plane and it took me into almost like first class. And so this is the first time I'm like, what? I have a big seat and a cooler screen, and I'm like, the seat reclines. They said, you sit here. And so I got an upgrade. And they said, we're not just gonna do that. Another flight attendant came and said, oh, we heard what you did, and what you did was so crazy. We wouldn't have been able to do that. We wouldn't have been as calm and as nice as you. And so here, we're gonna give you free flying miles. That means that I could buy a ticket to another trip. So they are saying, we're gonna give you free miles. And in that moment, I saw how God changed my chains. That he said, you did what I asked you to do. That yes, you suffered for a little while, but there's great joy. There's great reward. There's something better. And that's the whole purpose of this series. That whatever you're going through, if you're suffering because of your faith, count it great joy. Because there's going to be something better. There's going to be something bigger. There's going to be a great reward waiting for you. Because God is going to reward you. That there is purpose to your pain. And that through what you're going through, it's going to create a chain effect. So let's close our eyes and bow your heads as your house party leader comes up and closes you in prayer.